The evening light was soft when I stepped into my daughter's house, carrying a warm dish and hoping for a peaceful family dinner. The smell of cooked food filled the air, and for a moment I let myself believe things were finally calm in her marriage. I greeted everyone politely and took my seat, thinking the night would be slow and ordinary. I had no idea that within minutes I would watch something no mother should ever see, and I had no idea they were about to learn who I truly was. If you're watching this, please like the video, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. I walked into my daughter's kitchen the way I always did, quietly, gently, carrying 2 homemade dishes because I knew she'd been tired lately. I set the warm containers on the counter and looked around, trying to read the air like mothers do. The house looked clean, the table was set, the lights were soft. It almost felt normal. I told myself this was going to be a simple family dinner, nothing more. I told myself that maybe, finally, things had settled in her marriage. I wanted to believe that so badly. A mother always hopes, even when the signs are right there in front of her. She moved around the kitchen quickly, too quickly, almost like she was scared to make a sound. She smiled at me, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. I'd seen it before on women in my support groups years ago. A smile forced by fear, not happiness. Still, I pretended not to notice. I didn't want to embarrass her in her own home. I just helped her place the dishes on the table and touched her shoulder lightly, a silent way of asking if she was okay. She nodded, but the nod was small, weak. Her husband's mother was sitting at the table already, dressed like she was attending a formal event instead of a family dinner. She barely looked at me, only gave a stiff nod as if acknowledging a stranger, not the mother of the woman who lived in this house. I ignored her coldness. I chose peace. I chose silence. I had no idea that by the end of the night, I would choose something very different. My son-in-law walked in a few minutes later. He didn't greet me either. He didn't hug my daughter. He didn't say thank you for the dinner she had prepared. He didn't say anything at all. He just sat down heavily, like he owned every chair in the room. I watched him closely, not with anger, but with the slow, careful attention of a mother who sees more than she says. There was tension in his jaw. His eyes moved like someone searching for a fight. I took a breath and tried to focus on the good. It was just dinner, I reminded myself. Just a meal. Nothing bad had happened yet. We all sat down, and for a short moment, there was quiet. My daughter placed a plate in front of her husband, hands trembling just enough for me to notice. She served his mother next. She was serving everyone before herself, moving quickly, as if trying to avoid trouble. When she finally sat down, she reached for her fork, and I saw it. The way her wrist flinched, as if an unseen bruise was hidden beneath her sleeve. My heart tightened, but I kept my face calm. I didn't want to ruin her dinner. I didn't want to make her feel ashamed. The first few minutes of eating were silent. Too silent. I watched them all, feeling something uneasy crawl slowly into my chest. His mother kept staring at my daughter with narrowed eyes, the way someone looks when they are waiting for someone else to fail. I noticed the way my daughter kept checking her husband's expression before taking each bite, like she needed permission to move. I tried to talk about something light, the weather, the garden, the holidays, but every word felt like it landed wrong. My son-in-law didn't respond to anything. His mother rolled her eyes at everything. My daughter kept nodding like she was afraid not to, and I sat there thinking, this is not what marriage looks like. This is not what my daughter deserves. But I didn't know how fast everything was about to fall apart. It started with something tiny, something so small it should have been meaningless. My son-in-law reached for the salt, and when he tried shaking it, nothing came out. It was clogged. Anyone else would have tapped the bottom lightly, laughed, or asked someone to pass a new one. But not him. He slammed the salt shaker down so hard the plates jumped. My daughter instantly stood up to fix it, hands shaking as she tried to open the lid. And then, like a switch flipped inside him, he snapped. He didn't just raise his voice. He didn't just curse. He didn't just scold her. He hit her, a sharp, sudden slap that cracked through the room like a whip. I froze. My daughter froze. Even the air froze for a second. Then he did it again, and again, each slap harder than the last. Her head jerked to the side. Her hands flew up to shield herself. Her chair scraped the floor as she tried to back away. I stared in shock, unable to believe what I was seeing. My daughter, my baby, being beaten at her own dinner table while I sat there watching. But the worst part? The part that turned my blood cold? His mother clapped. She actually clapped. She smiled as if she were watching a show and said loudly, "Yes, teach her. She needs to learn." That was the moment the calm inside me died. That was the moment the mother in me woke up. And that was the moment I knew. They had just made the worst mistake of their lives. When I stepped back into the dining room, carrying nothing more than a folded napkin in my hand, the entire atmosphere felt even heavier than before. My daughter was seated now, shoulders curled in on themselves, her hands trembling on her lap as she tried to stop the tears from rolling. Her husband sat across from her with that same smug look, the look of a man who believed there would be no consequences for anything he did. And then there was his mother, perched at the end of the table like a queen in a cheap throne, watching my daughter with open disgust. She narrowed her eyes at me as I sat back down, and I realized she thought she had already put me in my place. She thought I was just another woman raised to obey, raised to stay silent, raised to accept whatever treatment a man chose to give her. She had no idea who she was dealing with. As I settled into my chair, she leaned forward and said with a sharp, cold tone, "In this family, men lead, women obey. You should have taught your daughter that instead of filling her head with nonsense." Her words weren't just cruel, they were deliberate, a warning meant to put me beneath her heel. My daughter whispered through tears, begging me softly, "Mom, please don't say anything. He'll make it worse." That sentence, that tiny, trembling voice, told me more than any bruise could. She wasn't afraid of embarrassment or a fight. She was afraid of the violence that would follow once the door closed, once the guests left, once she was alone with a man who believed her pain was his right. My heart tightened so sharply I thought it might stop, but I didn't let a single bit of emotion show on my face. I kept my hands still, my voice calm, my expression blank. Her husband leaned back in his chair, stretching as if he had just finished some difficult task, and smirked at me. "She deserved it," he said casually. "You don't know how she talks to me when nobody's around. Someone has to keep her in line." He said it like he was describing a pet, a child, a possession. His mother laughed in agreement, adding, "She should be grateful he puts up with her at all." It was at that moment the curtain dropped completely, revealing the truth they had tried to hide from me for years. This was not the first time he had hurt her, nor the second, nor the third. This was a pattern, one his mother supported and encouraged. And they had grown so comfortable with their cruelty that they no longer cared who saw it, not even the woman who had given birth to the person they were tormenting. They assumed I was powerless, that I was too old, too gentle, too outnumbered to pose any threat. But the more they talked, the more they revealed about themselves. He admitted, without even realizing it, that he had hit her many times before. He laughed about how she always cries, and his mother bragged about how discipline was normal in their family. They did not see what I saw on my daughter's arms, the fading yellow bruises, the finger-shaped marks, the thin line on her wrist where she had clearly been grabbed too hard. They didn't see how she flinched every time someone moved too quickly. They didn't see the way she stared down at her plate, too afraid to lift her eyes. But I saw it. I saw everything. And worst of all, I saw something else, the way my daughter's shoulders softened with relief when her husband stopped yelling for a moment. Relief. Real, deep relief. That was how I knew she had been living like this for a long time. When abuse becomes routine, silence becomes survival. and they truly believed I was just another silent woman who would endure it. His mother pointed a finger at me with an insulting smirk and said, "You're just a guest here. You don't get to tell us how to run this house." She said it with such confidence, such entitlement, such arrogance, that she had no idea she had just revealed the final piece I needed. In that moment, they exposed themselves fully. No hiding, no pretending, no shame. They believed this house was their kingdom, and they believed my daughter was their property. They believed I had no power here, no voice, no strength. They believed they had all the control. That was their mistake. Because while they were busy revealing their true nature, I was quietly deciding their fate. As I sat there watching my daughter shrink into herself, trying to disappear inside her own skin, memories from years ago began to rise inside me. Memories that reminded me exactly who I was before life softened me, before age made people assume I was harmless. I remembered the long nights I spent working in shelters, the years I spent helping women escape violent husbands, the files I kept, the reports I wrote, the cases I testified in. 30 years in domestic violence intervention is not something you forget. It becomes part of your bones. I remembered the women who sat in front of me with broken teeth, bruised cheekbones, swollen eyes, trembling hands. Women who once believed their abusers loved them. Women who once believed they were the problem. Women who once believed no one would rescue them. I remembered sitting beside judges who trusted my judgment more than some lawyers did, police officers who asked for my guidance when a case felt unclear, and social workers who relied on my experience when they were lost. I remembered the hundreds of women I helped relocate, the restraining orders I helped file, the emergency calls I answered at 2 a.m. when a woman whispered into the phone that her husband was asleep and she only had 60 seconds to escape. I remember holding hands, wiping tears, signing papers, documenting evidence, and building cases strong enough to put dangerous men behind bars. I did all of that quietly, professionally, without ever turning it into my personality. My daughter never knew the full depth of my work because I protected her from it. She knew I helped people, but she didn't know I had changed laws, testified in hearings, or been the woman responsible for some of the hardest convictions in the county. My son-in-law certainly didn't know. His mother didn't know either. They thought I was just an older woman who knitted scarves, baked pies, and visited on weekends. They thought my silence was weakness. They thought kindness meant fear. They truly believed that my age meant my power was gone. They didn't know that I had seen abusers like him thousands of times, men who smile in public and destroy their wives in private, men who think shouting is leadership, men who mistake control for love. They didn't know I could read every gesture at that table, the way his mother watched him for approval, the way he puffed up his chest after hitting my daughter, the way my daughter curled inward like a child bracing for a blow she knew too well. They didn't know I could recognize patterns instantly, patterns they thought they had hidden. And as I watched my daughter try to smile through tears, pretending she wasn't breaking, I realized something even deeper. She had been protecting me from the truth, thinking I was too old, too fragile, too tired to carry her burden. She forgot that I was the strongest woman she had ever known. But the truth wasn't just about who I was. It was also about what I had built. While they dismissed me as old and harmless, they didn't know I still had connections in law enforcement, judges who owed me favors, officers who trusted my instinct without question. They didn't know that the chief saved in my phone wasn't a nickname. It was the literal chief of police, a man who had once told me, "If you ever need anything, you call me first." They didn't know I still held certifications and access. They didn't know I had spent decades studying predators disguised as husbands. And they didn't know I had promised myself years ago that if abuse ever touched my own family, I would act faster than lightning. As I looked at my daughter's bruised arm, all those old instincts came back. Not anger, not rage, but precision. I knew exactly what to do. I knew exactly who to call. I knew exactly how fast this entire situation could flip upside down. And while they sat there believing they had silenced me, believing they had intimidated me, believing they had shown dominance in their home, they didn't realize the truth. No matter whose name was on the mailbox, the moment they laid a hand on my daughter, they stepped into my field of expertise. They stepped into my territory. They stepped into my war zone. And I had never lost one. When I sat back down at that table, the room felt different. The same lights, the same plates, the same food on the table, but everything looked sharper, colder, like the truth had finally stepped out of the shadows. My son-in-law leaned back with that proud, careless look some men wear when they think they've proved their power. His hand still rested on the table like it owned the whole house. His mother sat beside him with a smile that made my stomach twist. She wasn't shocked. She wasn't upset. She wasn't even pretending. She looked pleased, almost proud, as if she had been waiting for that slap to finally happen in front of someone else, like it confirmed some lesson she had taught her son long ago. I looked at my daughter, really looked. Her eyes were red, her cheek was slowly swelling, and her hands were shaking as she reached for the serving spoon. She tried so hard to keep moving like nothing happened, but her whole body flinched every time he lifted his hand or shifted in his chair. That's when I noticed the small faded bruise just under her sleeve. It wasn't new, and it wasn't alone. There were more, faint marks that only a mother would notice. That was the moment something inside me changed. This wasn't a one-time slap. This was a pattern, a life she had been hiding from me, a quiet suffering she carried because she didn't want to worry me. He didn't even try to hide his cruelty. He nodded toward her with a smug little grin and said, "She needs to learn to do things right the first time." His mother chuckled like that was the most normal thing in the world. She cut her meat, swallowed, and then added, "A wife must obey. Your mother spoiled you. We're correcting that now." Correcting. As if my daughter were some broken appliance they bought at a discount. As if her pain was part of some family rule book I didn't sign up for. I felt a coldness crawl up my spine. They were comfortable with this. That meant it had been going on for a long time. My daughter avoided my eyes. She tried to smile at me, but the corners of her lips didn't lift. She whispered, "Mom, I'm fine." But her voice trembled. When I reached out gently and touched her hand, she pulled away as if expecting someone, not me, to punish her for it. That was the moment I knew. My daughter wasn't living with a husband. She was living with her captor, and his mother was his partner in cruelty. I took a breath and studied the room like I was gathering evidence, because I was. The broken plate in the corner that nobody bothered picking up. The dent in the lower wall near the kitchen door. The way my daughter slightly limped when she carried a dish back to the counter. They didn't see me observing them. They were too sure of themselves, too sure of their control, too sure that my daughter was alone in this world except for them. Then the son-in-law leaned back farther, wiped his mouth, and said to me, "You shouldn't interfere. She listens better when she's reminded." Reminded. That word burned straight through me. His mother nodded proudly, saying, "This is our house, our rules. Don't bring your old ideas into it." Old ideas. My ideas. Ideas like respect, safety, dignity. They called those old. I didn't speak. I didn't shout. I didn't flinch. I simply watched. I watched every movement, every expression, every bruise, every controlling gesture. My silence wasn't fear. It was the silence of a storm gathering strength. And as I sat there, something else hit me. They believed I was powerless because I was quiet. They believed I was helpless because I was older. They believed I would endure this because I was just the mother. They believed I had no knowledge, no connections, no strength left in me. They underestimated me. For the first time in a long time, I felt a slow, steady fire grow inside my chest. Not rage, resolve. Deep, cold, unshakable resolve. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I knew exactly who I was going to call. And I knew exactly how their world would crumble once they realized the truth. They didn't just hurt my daughter. They awakened her mother. When my daughter followed me into the kitchen, the moment the door swung shut behind us, her whole body seemed to collapse inward. She kept one hand against her cheek, the fresh red mark already deepening into purple. She didn't look at me at first. She stared at the floor like a child who feared punishment, not like a grown woman who should have felt safe in her own home. The kitchen light flickered slightly above us, and for a moment I thought she was going to faint. I reached out to steady her, and she flinched before realizing it was only me. That tiny reaction broke something inside my chest. She whispered, "Mom, please don't make a scene. Just let it go." Her voice was thin, brittle, like glass ready to shatter. She kept glancing toward the doorway, terrified he might follow us. That's when I understood how deep this fear ran. My daughter wasn't just scared of an argument. She was scared of consequences she'd already learned too well. She was scared of the punishment that might come if I stood up for her. She was scared for herself, and maybe even for me. I reached out and held her hands gently. They were cold and shaking. "You're not fine," I said softly. "You don't have to pretend with me." Her lips trembled, and she tried to smile, but it wasn't a smile. It was a survival instinct. She leaned into me for a second, just enough for her forehead to touch my shoulder, and I felt her tears soak into my sleeve. She didn't sob, didn't sigh loudly, didn't collapse the way someone does when they know they're safe. She cried silently. Those silent tears were the loudest thing I heard that entire night. I brushed her hair back and looked at her face. Up close, I saw things she tried to hide. The faint bruise under her eye that makeup couldn't fully cover, the small cut near her lip, the defensive stiffness in her shoulders. These weren't signs of a single argument. They were signs of repetition, of a pattern, of a life lived in quiet fear. My heart pounded with a mix of heartbreak and pure, focused determination. She pulled away and whispered, "Mom, please, he's stressed. His job has been rough. I just need to be patient." Patient. That word stung. Women had been told to be patient for generations. Patient with violence, patient with disrespect, patient with cruelty. Patience had been used as a weapon against us. I felt anger rise in my chest, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I cupped her face gently, and she closed her eyes like those few seconds of comfort were something she hadn't felt in a long time. "Has this happened before?" I asked quietly, not pushing, just giving her space to answer. She didn't speak. She just lowered her eyes. That silence was enough. I didn't need her to say the words. Her silence held the entire truth. She grabbed a dish towel and wiped her eyes quickly. "Mom, don't do anything tonight. If you say something, it'll get worse. His mother will make it worse. They'll both turn on me. Please, just eat and leave. I'll be okay." She tried so hard to control the situation, to manage the danger, the way abused women often do, trying to keep the peace, trying to avoid triggers, trying to survive another day. My heart broke, not just from the pain she was in, but from the fact that she thought she had to protect me from him. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. This wasn't the moment for speeches. This wasn't the moment for emotions. This was the moment a mother transforms from comfort to shield. I held her hands again and said softly, "You won't be alone, sweetheart. Not anymore." She didn't understand what I meant, not yet, but she squeezed my fingers with the small strength she had left. That small squeeze was her silent plea for help. It was her silent collapse into the safety she barely remembered. She stepped back and whispered again, "Mom, please don't make it worse." She didn't realize that the worst had already happened, and it didn't come from me. It came from the man who should have protected her, and the mother-in-law who encouraged his cruelty. I looked at my daughter, my baby, My firstborn, the girl I raised with love and caution and hope, and I felt something shift inside me. A line was drawn. A quiet vow settled deep in my bones. I kissed her forehead and wiped her cheek gently. She was trembling, but I wasn't. For the first time that night, someone in that house wasn't afraid. She thought I would sit back down at that table and pretend nothing happened. She thought I would swallow my pain and protect her secret. She thought I would behave like the powerless woman they believed I was. But I was her mother. And after what I saw, after what I learned, after what she tried so desperately to hide, I knew exactly what I had to do. The moment I walked out of that kitchen, I wasn't the guest anymore. I was the storm. When I walked out of that kitchen, something inside me had already shifted. I wasn't shaking anymore. I wasn't confused. I wasn't wondering whether I should step in or stay quiet. The moment I saw my daughter's swollen cheek, the fear in her eyes, the way she begged me to not make things worse, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. Things were already worse. And if I stayed silent like they expected, things would only get darker for her. So I straightened my back, wiped my eyes, and stepped back into that dining room with a kind of calm I didn't even know I had left in me. The air was different now. I could feel it. Her husband sat at the head of the table, laughing at something his mother whispered to him. He wasn't laughing because the joke was funny. He was laughing because he felt powerful, because he believed he had control over everyone in that house, his wife, his mother, and me. His mother had that smug little smile on her face, sipping her wine like she had just watched her son win a sport instead of strike his wife. My daughter hadn't come out of the kitchen yet. She was hiding, and that silence, her absence, made him feel even bolder. I walked to my seat slowly, letting the room settle. I could feel their eyes on me. I didn't speak. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply picked up my purse and placed it gently on the table, as if I was about to search for a tissue. His mother smirked. She thought she had broken me. She thought I would cry quietly and keep my head down like a proper woman. She didn't know that my silence wasn't fear, it was preparation. My fingers brushed against my phone, and I felt the weight of every year I spent helping women like my daughter. 30 years of intervention work. 30 years of watching mothers cry over bruised daughters, children cling to their terrified mothers, families torn apart by men who believed they were kings of their own little castles. I knew the process, I knew the system, and I knew exactly who to call. I had not forgotten the people who trusted me, worked beside me, and fought with me, and they had not forgotten me either. I unlocked my phone. My son-in-law snorted. "Who are you calling?" He mocked loudly, loud enough for his mother to chuckle. "Your knitting club?" His mother laughed as if that was the funniest thing she'd heard all night. I looked at him with the kind of calm that makes men nervous. I didn't answer him. I didn't owe him a single word. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed. I had only ever labeled it one way, Chief. No title, no last name, no description, just Chief. The man who had worked cases with me. The man who had seen me stand my ground against dangerous husbands, manipulative partners, men who thought the law belonged to them. He trained half the officers in our district, and he respected me the way my own son-in-law never could. I pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice. Then his familiar voice answered. I didn't need to explain the whole story. I didn't need to cry. I didn't need to beg. All I said was 4 words. 4 words that made his voice go serious instantly. I need a team. There was no hesitation, no questions. He simply said, "Address?" And that was enough. When I gave it to him, he replied, "On our way." The whole exchange lasted less than 10 seconds, but those 10 seconds changed everything. I set my phone down calmly on the table. My son-in-law laughed again, but something flickered behind his eyes, a quick flash of nervousness, like a shadow crossing his face. He didn't know who I called, but he sensed something had shifted. His mother looked at me with narrowed eyes, like she was trying to read whether I was bluffing. I didn't give her a single clue. I just folded my hands on the table and waited. The next 12 minutes felt like an hour. The house was silent except for the quiet clatter of cutlery and the occasional smug whisper between the two of them. My daughter stayed in the kitchen. I could hear her trying not to cry. I stared at the tablecloth, counting my breaths, steady, controlled, ready. Then I heard it, the sound of tires rolling up the driveway, firm footsteps approaching the door, and the unmistakable click of police radios. My son-in-law shot up from his chair. His mother's glass froze halfway to her lips. They both looked toward the front door as if a ghost had arrived. But it wasn't a ghost. It was justice. The pounding on the front door was firm, controlled, and unmistakably official. It wasn't the kind of knock a neighbor makes. It wasn't the kind of knock a friend makes. It was the kind of knock that says, "Open this door now." My son-in-law froze halfway between the table and the hallway, his face shifting from arrogance to confusion. His mother looked at him as if waiting for him to tell her what to do, but even he didn't have a script for this moment. The house went silent, so silent that you could hear my daughter's breath catch in the kitchen. The knock came again, louder this time. "Open the door!" one of the officers called out. My son-in-law jolted back to life and marched toward the entrance, puffing his chest like he still had control. He swung the door open and said, "What's the problem?" in a tone he thought sounded strong, but his voice cracked, and everyone heard it. 4 officers stepped inside, led by the chief himself. His eyes scanned the room, landing on me first. He gave the smallest nod, respect, recognition, readiness. Then he looked at my son-in-law. "We received a report," he said, his voice calm but firm, "of domestic violence happening inside this home." My son-in-law's head snapped toward me. "You called them? You?" He spat the words like they were poison. His mother grabbed his arm, whispering, stay calm, don't say anything stupid." But it was too late for calm. The chief stepped closer and said, "Sir, step away from me." His mother pushed forward and shouted, "You have no right to enter our home. This is a family matter. We will handle it ourselves." She tried to sound authoritative, but it came out desperate and shrill. The chief didn't even look at her. At that moment, she didn't matter. The law was already inside the house. One officer moved toward the kitchen. "Ma'am," he said gently, "are you hurt?" My daughter hesitated, then stepped out slowly. Her cheek was red, already swelling. Her hands trembled. She looked at the officers, then at me, like she was trying to decide whether she should speak or stay silent. I walked toward her, placed a hand on her back, and whispered, "You're safe now." The officers saw everything, her bruises, her fear, the broken plate on the floor near the table, the way her husband suddenly avoided eye contact. They began documenting everything, taking pictures, writing notes. The air grew heavier as the truth filled the room. My son-in-law finally snapped, "This is ridiculous! She's fine! Tell them you're fine! Tell them!" His voice was no longer confident. It was begging, demanding, threatening all at once. My daughter's lip shook, and she whispered, "I'm not fine." That was all it took. The chief nodded to the 2 officers behind him. "Cuff him!" His mother screamed, "No, you can't take him. She deserved it. She always talks back. She knows better. She needs to respect him." The room fell still. The officers turned to her, and one said coldly, "Ma'am, you just admitted to witnessing ongoing abuse." She clamped her mouth shut, but the damage was done. My son-in-law tried to pull away as the officers grabbed his arms. "This is a mistake! You can't arrest me! I didn't do anything wrong! Mom, say something!" But even his mother couldn't stop the law now. The chief leaned down and said, "We have enough evidence for immediate detainment, and we'll gather more." The handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Clean, final, undeniable. My daughter broke down into my arms. Years of fear poured out in tears she had kept hidden. His mother cried too, but not for the right reasons. She cried because her control was gone. Her power was gone. Her son couldn't hide behind her anymore. As they walked him out the door, he shouted one more time, "This is your fault." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The officers escorted him into the police car. Reporters nearby, alerted by scanners, were already gathering. His mother tried to block the cameras, but there was no saving the reputation she cared so much about. Inside the house, the chief turned to me and said quietly, "We've got her now. She's safe." And for the first time in years, my daughter finally looked like she believed it. When the police car pulled away, the house felt strangely empty, even though there were still 3 of us standing inside. My daughter leaned on the counter, shaking, trying to catch her breath. She kept touching her cheek gently, as if she needed to remind herself the pain was real, not imagined. I placed a warm cloth on it and watched the color slowly spread across the bruised skin. Every time she flinched, something inside me twisted. A mother is never prepared to see her child wounded by the person who promised to protect her. His mother paced the living room like a trapped animal. Her face was red, her voice was raw from screaming. She kept muttering, "They can't do this. They can't do this to my boy." She wasn't worried about my daughter. She wasn't worried about the injuries. She was only worried about control slipping out of her hands faster than she could grab it. She stopped suddenly, turned on us, and snapped, "You ruined our family. You ruined everything." Her voice shook with fury. I looked at her calmly and said nothing. I didn't have to. Her son's actions spoke louder than any argument she could ever make. One of the officers came back inside to finish paperwork. He approached my daughter gently, giving her space. "Ma'am, we're going to need a full statement and pictures. We'll also get you a protective order tonight." My daughter nodded weakly. She wasn't used to people protecting her. She wasn't used to being believed. The officer glanced at me and said quietly, "Thank you for calling. If you hadn't, this would have kept getting worse." His mother scoffed loudly, crossing her arms. "She's exaggerating. You'll see. My son is a good man." The officer didn't even look at her. He continued writing. Her opinion no longer mattered. Minutes later, another officer returned from the hallway holding a box. Inside were broken phone cases, ripped clothing, and printed threatening messages. Things my daughter had hidden. Things she had hoped would go away on their own. Things she never had the courage to bring to light. The officer placed the box on the table and said, "This wasn't the first time." My daughter's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry out of fear. She cried out of relief. The truth was finally out in the open. She no longer had to carry the weight of hiding what she had been enduring. His mother lunged toward the box, as if she could somehow make it disappear. "What is that? Where did you get that? You can't use that against him." The chief answered from the doorway, "It's evidence, and we'll gather more at the station." She froze. The fight drained out of her all at once. She looked small suddenly, like all the arrogance had finally melted off her. My daughter whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom. I should have told you sooner." I held her close. "You don't have to apologize. You're safe now." She cried harder then, silent, shaking tears clinging to my shoulder. Years of fear, shame, and loneliness poured out in that moment. This was not a woman who failed. This was a woman who survived. The officers finished the paperwork and handed her a card with resources, counseling, legal support, emergency lines. Another officer said, "We'll be in touch tomorrow." "You're not alone in this." My daughter nodded. She clutched the card like it was the first lifeline she had been given in a long time. His mother stormed toward the door. "I'll get him out. You'll see. He'll come home." The chief stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "He won't be coming home tonight, or any time soon. The judge has already approved the hold." She opened her mouth to argue, but one look at his face silenced her. She stomped outside without another word. Her car screeched down the street seconds later. Inside the house, the quiet was heavy but clean. My daughter looked around, seeing her home differently now, not as a prison, but as a place she could finally reclaim. She touched her cheek again and whispered, "I can't believe it's over." I squeezed her hand. "It's not over," I said gently. "It's beginning." She nodded slowly. For the first time since I had arrived that evening, her shoulders relaxed. The officers left, the air cleared, and the night finally calmed. My daughter sat beside me, leaning into me like she used to when she was a child. The fear in her eyes was fading, replaced by something stronger: determination. They thought they were strong because they had power inside their own home. They thought their cruelty made them untouchable. They thought their rules controlled everything. But they forgot one thing: a mother watching her child suffer is the most dangerous force in the world. The house was quiet after everything ended. Not the heavy, painful kind of quiet I heard earlier that night, but a new kind of quiet, one that felt like fresh air after a storm. My daughter sat on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked tired, bruised, and shaken, but there was something else there too, something I hadn't seen in a long time. A tiny spark, a beginning, a small sign that she could breathe again. I made her a cup of warm tea and sat beside her. She leaned her head gently against my arm, like she used to when she was little and scared of thunderstorms. I could feel her body finally relaxing after months, maybe even years, of fear. For a long time, neither of us spoke. We just sat there, letting the silence settle in a safe way instead of a frightening one. Sometimes healing starts with nothing more than sitting in the same room without worrying who will raise their voice next. Later that night, I walked her to the guest room in my home. She hesitated at the doorway, looking uncertain, almost guilty. "You don't have to take care of me, Mom," she whispered. I touched her cheek softly and said, "I'm not taking care of a burden. I'm taking care of my child." That was the moment she broke again, but these tears were different. These weren't tears of fear, they were tears of release. She settled into the bed, hugging a pillow like it was the first safe thing she'd held in months. I sat beside her until she fell asleep, watching her breathe steadily. She looked younger in that moment, like the years of abuse had added shadows that were finally beginning to fade. I pulled the blanket higher around her shoulders and turned off the light. In the days that followed, healing didn't appear all at once. It showed up in small ways. The first morning, she flinched when she heard a loud sound outside, but she relaxed when she realized she was safe. The second morning, she smiled a little while eating breakfast, telling me she slept better than she had in years. The third morning, she opened the curtains herself, letting sunlight into the room. I knew then she was slowly coming back to herself. Her therapy sessions began soon after. She went quiet during the first, shaky during the second, but stronger during the third. She started talking about the things she hid, how she stopped laughing at home, how she walked on eggshells, how she checked his mood before she spoke every single day. She said she felt like she had been disappearing little by little until she didn't recognize herself. But each session helped her take back one small piece of who she was before fear ruled her life. The divorce process moved quickly because the evidence was undeniable. The officers, the photos, the reports. I made sure every piece was in place. She didn't have to argue or beg or explain. The law spoke for her. When the papers were finalized, she held them in her hands and whispered, "I'm free." She didn't celebrate loudly. She didn't shout in victory. She simply closed her eyes and let the weight fall off her shoulders like a heavy coat she had worn too long. Her children, my grandchildren, began to change too. They laughed more. They talked more. They clung to her like they had been waiting for this softness to return. They asked fewer questions about why things were different, and more questions like, "Can we stay here, Grandma?" I told them yes, every time. This house had enough love for all of us. Months passed, and my daughter became herself again. She found a new job, a new routine, a new sense of confidence. She didn't rush into anything. She didn't try to rebuild her life in one leap. She took it slow, step by step, brick by brick. And every time she accomplished something small, like paying her own bill or driving somewhere without fear, I saw her stand a little taller. On Mother's Day, she handed me a small card. Her hands were steady now, not shaking like before. Inside, she had written just one sentence: "Thank you for saving me." I held the card for a long time, reading those words over and over. I didn't save her by being loud or violent or dramatic. I saved her by refusing to stay silent when I saw my child being hurt. I saved her by stepping in when she couldn't step out. I saved her because a mother's job never ends, not when her child is grown, not when people tell her to stay out of it, and not when the world tries to convince her she is powerless. The moral is simple and clear. Never underestimate a quiet mother. The world may think she is soft, gentle, and harmless, but when her child is in danger, she becomes something else entirely, something unbreakable, something unstoppable. Still waters hide storms, and the storm I unleashed that night saved my daughter's life.